Yes, please go ahead.
I'll let you start us off, Soham, and then I'll.
Oh, hey, so welcome everyone to session 4 of publishing and reviewing papers in engineering education. Last time, Scotty gave us a lot of information on how to access relevant papers and how to gauge whether a particular journal is a good outlet or not, and whether a particular paper, a particular author is credible or not, for lack of a better word. And we went through a lot of websites. Hopefully, you all have had a chance to look at those websites or go through them yourself. So if you have any questions on that, we're ready to take your questions. But if not, I'll let Scotty go along with today's session, which is the introduction section.
Okay, and just to let everybody know that a lot of the links that I showed you last time, when we share out the slides, those links will be there, but it was primarily just one link, which was scholar.google.com. And as Soham said, we're more than happy to field any questions that you may have. So today we are moving into the next major topic, which is actually writing and talking about what needs to go into the major parts of the paper. So what are the major parts of the paper, and in a lot more detail on what goes into them. We're going to be starting with the introduction section. So do you want to open up, talk anything about, or say anything about generally setting up introductions within engineering education? Because my information is going to be much more general. So I don't know if you want to tell them, like, how is this normally used in engineering education, or do you want me to keep going?
Well, the only comment I'd make is this is the section where you want to introduce the work that you're doing and engage the reader in order for them to want to read the rest of the paper. So nothing special for engineering education, I guess.
Yeah, and one thing I will point out with that, though, it is important in this section when writing the introduction, and just when you're starting the paper in general, that you need to understand the area and understand kind of engineering education. What are they interested in? And that's what we were talking about last time, in some ways for you to start finding out what the area is interested in. And you need to make sure you really hit on that, as Soham just said. And it's best to do that in the very beginning. So start out your introduction, which what I usually refer to as a hook. This is something that will catch your readers or your reviewers' attention. Your primary task is to make them realize and see that, hey, the point that you are making, the focus of this paper, is important. And you can do this very quickly, usually, by starting out with examples. Usually you want to keep that, if you're going to the example route, to keep it to one example, or to present broad area statistics. But remember, if you do start out with statistics, you need to make sure that you cite where those are coming from. So if you throw out a statistic, make sure that you can very quickly actually cite that and back it up, because that way your readers know that you're not just making up that statistic. And then you want to end this opening of your introduction, the first part of it, with your research question or your statement of purpose. So, and we're going to talk a little bit more about what a research question is in just a second. But the reason why you want to do this, starting with that general hook that's saying what you're doing that's interesting, giving some information as facts as to why this is important to look at, then giving them your research statement or your research question before you go on to the rest of the paper. And you can usually do this opening in about 2 to 3 paragraphs. Depending on the length of the paper, sometimes you'll do this in 1 paragraph. But this is important because this is your best and sometimes only chance to really catch your reader and keep them, and to make sure they really understand what you're looking at. So with this opening of your introduction, you can, if you do it well, you can streamline, you can catch your reader's attention, streamline to exactly what you're going to be looking at and talking about in the paper. If you do not, you can confuse your reader. They may go off on kind of a garden path, think that you're going to talk about something else, which will cause them confusion in reading the rest of the paper. And that often happens, especially if it's a reviewer who's reviewing this when you're trying to get it published. If at that point, if they think that you are going to be talking about one thing and you end up talking about something else, that is something they're going to take points away from. Remember last time we talked about making sure you're citing the major important articles, because I said it actually can hurt your credibility if you're not. This is another major way in which you can lose credibility. If your reader gets confused, often there's nothing you can do about that. Sometimes they just get confused. But this is a good way to really help to stop that early on in the paper. And it prevents you from losing that potential credibility early on. And a lot of the tricks and suggestions that we're going to be giving you over the next few lectures when we talk about introduction, methods, results, and discussion are a lot of ways in which you can more clearly state your information so that you're not losing credibility. Because that's one of the main things that you have to worry about as an author when presenting scientific research, is your credibility. Once you have lost your credibility to your reader, you've lost them, because they're going to question everything. And especially with the reviewer, if you start to lose your credibility with them, they are going to pick your paper apart in much more thorough detail than they would otherwise. Whether they may be more lenient to some problems, or they may make helpful suggestions versus scathing critiques on whether or not how they perceive your credibility overall. So, and your opening of your introduction is actually one of the main areas where you can help to establish this credibility. So as I said, you come and you're building to, in this opening of your introduction, to your research question. And this is something that a lot of people ignore or do not do very well. So what is this? So we do have an example here in the next slide. If I can get it to go to the next slide. Okay, so what you're looking at with the research question, and here's an example. You can read this. I will draw your attention to the third line. So yeah, you can, or the second sentence in the third line. So the research question we ask is, how well do activities and projects designed for in-person, cooperative, project-based learning translate to an online class? So you notice that is a very explicitly stated. Does it have to be stated as a question? No. You can state it, you could put it in there as a statement in which you just kind of say, this manuscript or this paper or in this study we will look at. So one thing I will point out, notice in this example we do have the research question we ask is, and then the next sentence, from this, we hope to inform. And I'll get to the rest of that and the importance of the I'm pointing that out because we do say we in here. You need to be very careful about using we and other types of pronouns like that in your writing. Again, the reason why is because it can go into your objectivity. So if you don't look objective, it can, for some readers, cause them to basically ask, are you too close to this? Are you really an objective researcher? And some journals actually do not allow you to write with pronouns such as that. So you need to really be careful with it. But in general, there are no hard and fast rules. If you like writing with it, but using pronouns and personal pronouns, you can. But that could also be stated. So the current research question asks instead of we ask is. It's just I'm not saying that you have to write it this way. If you're more comfortable writing it without the we, you could write it that way. But there's a research question. Notice right after that, though, right after the research question, we actually tell you specifically what we hope to find. We hope to inform the design and implementation of cooperative learning in other online software engineering and CS programs. So we have a question, and we tell you this is so you know what our question that we're going to be looking at a larger scale and what we hope our contribution will be. So right there you have very quickly given the what is the question and what is the potential impact.
So
now
a couple of things I wanted to point out.
Yeah.
Sorry, Scotty.
No, go ahead.
You're taking a pause there. So a couple of things I wanted to point out. One, in the example that we have shown, that's not the entire introduction section, just to clarify. That's just a small part of it. It's one thing I wanted to point out. So there's the research, the introduction should really set up a lot of other things as essentially contextualizing what you're trying to do and motivating it. So that last part, second thing I wanted to say was that last sentence that you see there is part of the motivation. It's not just what will the research question answer, but it's also trying to answer the question, why are we doing this work?
Yeah.
Right? Why do we care about this research that we're doing?
Yeah, why is it important?
Yeah. Go ahead.
And you know, this statement is kind of the end of the opening of the introduction. So that opening section, I said, is usually about 2 or 3 paragraphs. This would be an example of what might be kind of the last paragraph in that opening of the introduction. And I believe this is from one of the example papers, correct, Soham?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, so you can actually go and look at that, and I encourage you to go and look at that to get the entire opening and to see what that looks like in context. After you're done with the opening, and well, I'll actually get to these other few points here. So this is an example of a research question. I'll talk to you a little bit more about variables and hypotheses and predictions a little bit later. But from your research question, your reader should be able to pick out what are your important variables. So here we want to know that how well do activities and projects design and in-person cooperative problem-based learning translate to online classes. So okay, we are looking at differences between in-person and online classes. So that's the variable that we're looking at. And we're looking to see how well these translate. So we are looking at learning in some aspect. And does the implementation of this one task change between online and in-person? And does the impact change? So we can actually easily start picking out the high-level variables from this research question. What we don't know yet are what our hypotheses and predictions are specifically going to be. And a lot of times these hypotheses and predictions do not come until the end of the introduction section. So what normally comes right after you've established the importance of in the opening of the introduction, written down to your very specific research question, it is now time for you to start talking about what is known about that question. No matter what research question you are asking, there's going to be previous literature that is relevant to it. If you say that basically there is no relevant literature to this topic, you're probably wrong. And somebody's going to call you on it. There's probably out there sometimes you have to look for stuff that's only related. And again, Google Scholar will help you find that information in those articles. Also, that may be a case where you need to broaden your search and you might need help. So one good thing about that is that there are a lot of other colleagues and you will meet other colleagues, maybe other researchers in engineering education who have more expertise in specific areas, or researchers outside of engineering education who are in the broader education area who may have done research relevant to your research topic. If you talk to them, if you contact them, they may be able to give you some more relevant literature that could go into your literature review. But what is this literature review that I'm talking about? Well, what you're doing, you're telling what is already known about the research question. You want to provide important, essential, and relevant studies. Literature reviews do not have to be extensive. What they need to be though, is a good summary of all of the essential studies that are needed to talk about your research question. There may be other studies, and they may be very good studies, but they may not be 100% relevant, and they may take you off task. And that you have to remember, like, what you're doing is forming a story in this literature review. Essentially, it is a logical flow of ideas. So they should kind of lead you somewhere. And where they're leading you to is actually to the study that you are going to conduct, or that you have conducted. And that's how you select articles. So if you know you want to look at specific variables, you need to select articles that are related to those variables. If you are not doing a study, if you're not looking at something such as maybe gender, maybe you don't care about the gender of the students in the class and how that impacted their performance. Even though there may be a relevant study, or a study that you find in your topic that deals with the impact that gender has, you don't need to cover that just because you found it. If you're not dealing with gender, if it is not relevant, you do not have to cover it. Again, because what you're building is a logical flow of articles and article summaries. Now, what is essential is for you to provide good summaries. Now note, these summaries need to be actual summaries of the paper. They should be in your own words. And as I said, they've already relevant research, which I've hit on more than enough. Just a few things. Do not copy the whole sentence or the whole paragraph from other articles and put it into your articles. We've already talked about this a little bit earlier when we talked about plagiarism. What you should be doing is taking it, understanding the previous article, summarizing it in your own words. Remember to use correct citation formatting. There are lots of different styles out there, and each one of them wants you to cite in a different way. But just to, like I said, make sure you do cite information. If you're talking about information from somebody else that is not you, you need to cite it. And while I'm on this topic, in the introduction, none of the ideas that you're putting forth in this part of the introduction should be you. You should not be talking about your own opinion at this point, not in the literature review section. It is only other people's ideas, other people's work. So everything you write about, you should be able to cite it from where it's coming from. Just to hit on this one last time, do not copy someone's work directly. That is plagiarism. And there are a lot of journals now who are searching, actually doing plagiarism searches. And if you do have too high a level of plagiarism, they will automatically reject your paper. And also, if it is a highly relevant, a journal or an article that's highly relevant to you, and you do plagiarize from it, you also have to realize that your most likely reviewers are going to be those people that you're citing. And if you plagiarize somebody's work, that means you're probably going to use a lot of their work. And that makes them a more likely reviewer. So when they get it to review, they are going to recognize your work, that you've actually taken stuff directly from them. And it does happen. I mean, it's happened to me before when I've received stuff to review. And I've had to contact the editor back and say, I'm sorry, but page, I don't know what it was. It was like page 4 of the article was actually directly from page 5 or 6 of this other previous work of mine. So yes, it has happened, and it can happen. So please do not plagiarism because you can get caught.
Scotty, a couple of questions have come up before we move on to the next. Yeah. And in fact, before that, I want to just clarify one thing as well. So you mentioned that the stuff in this shouldn't be the author's own views at this point. That it should be summarizing what the related work is and what the other what the cited literature is proposing. It should be their views. So, and then we talked a little bit about plagiarism, and so there might be some confusion about, oh, well, if we're going to present the other people's views, shouldn't we be writing them in our own words, and how is that going to work out? So one thing I wanted to clarify, and something I tell my students all the time, is there are abstracts available for these other papers, and your literature review shouldn't simply copy those abstracts and put them in. That would be plagiarism. Now, you don't want to put words in the author's mouth and give your own views as theirs, or start to confuse what they are saying with what you want them to say, or anything like that. But you really want to extract whatever the authors of the cited paper are saying and say it in your own words, and say whatever is relevant to your work, because the paper, remember, is going to talk about 5 different things perhaps, and perhaps only 3 of those or 2 of those are really relevant to what you in your paper are trying to do. So you need to extract those and stress those, and not stress so much the other things that the cited paper is talking about.
Yes.
Just wanted to clarify that one thing. So a couple of questions real quick. One of them is, how many pages does the literature review should be? So again, kind of a length type question. Yeah. You want to address that real quick?
Yeah, I can actually answer that really quickly, which is there is no set length. It is until completion. So in some cases that completely depends on the length of the overall paper. I've seen introduction sections that are a page. I've seen 2 pages for shorter articles. And I've seen 15, 20, 30-page introduction sections. So it really depends on the length of your article and what you need for coverage and what the purpose of it was for. So that 30-page one was actually for a dissertation. So they tend to have a lot of background with dissertations.
Right. So someone's asking about a rule of thumb, and well, I'll just interject by saying for a 15-page journal paper, I'd expect at least 2 pages to be related work, or around 2 pages, just as a rule of thumb. Scott,
yeah.
You wanna...
Yeah. For 15, let's see. So I'm trying to do math in my head really quickly. It's late here. Um,
Well, let's take a 10-page paper, easier math.
no, I was going to say, that's actually, I went back to a 10-page paper and I was going to do it by 1.5. Um, you're really looking at about, for the overall introduction, in that 10-page paper would be about 3.5 pages, probably.
Yeah, total introduction, but the related,
Yes,
I
total
guess the specific question was what part or
literature
what
review.
percentage should be talking
Yeah,
about work other people have done.
yeah. So once again, if you shorten that, you're looking probably at about a half, fourth of a page or so, or a third of a page opening, another third of a page or so um, of your closing when you're transitioning into the methods. So, and the rest of that, for the most part, is going to be literature review.
Right, so a bunch of other questions have popped up, but before I lose sight of a previous question, so one of the participants asked whether there should be sections in the introduction section, because I guess one of the sample papers that we gave out had like subsections within introduction or subheadings within the introduction, and
Yeah.
one didn't.
Yeah. So in general, that tends to be stylistic. Some outlets require specific subsections, um, but in general, you want to use subsections to help organize the paper. So you're signaling large transitions. But are they required? No, but they are actually helpful um, to the reader. So there's actually a large amount of research on the use of advanced organizers and advanced organizers in reading. And section headers actually serve as an advanced organizer. They're basically telling the reader, hey, this is what we're going to be talking about after this point. That's what an advanced organizer does. And that actually really does help reading comprehension. So no, there are no hard and fast requirements, but yes, they are helpful.
And I
But
think,
yeah,
go ahead,
don't go
Scotty.
crazy with them.
Right. Yeah, so I've seen a lot of times in computer architecture research, and quite often I would say even in the disciplinary computer engineering education research, people are used to separating out the introduction and the related work. I often tend to do that myself.
Yeah.
So the background or literature review might be a section on its own and not even be part of the introduction. So the introduction would just set the stage for why do we care about this work and what's the research question and what exactly are we trying to do. And then the next section would be the related work which contextualizes the research. Like what do we know about this so far?
Yeah. And in general, though, that's usually all one part. All of that is all introduction. But those are just subsections within it. So, and the other thing, once you get into your literature review, you can create and compartmentalize subsections within there also. So it is perfectly okay to even break down within the literature review.
Right. So one last question before we move on to the next slide. So one participant asks, if we are referring to our own paper or taking parts of our own paper published earlier, is that plagiarism?
Yes.
And yeah, that's an interesting thing
That
to
is,
think
yeah.
about,
It is
because what
still
happens when you write a
self-plagiarism.
paper is you hand over the copyright to the publisher. So you're no longer an owner of the paper. You've handed off the copyright to the publisher.
Yeah, and that's actually a very common thing that people do as far as like the types of plagiarism. Self-plagiarism is actually probably one of the more common ones. But yeah, you really should not. You should still be rewriting it because the current paper has a different focus than the previous papers you wrote it for. So this one should have a slightly different. Does that mean it has to be completely 100% different? No. You're still talking about the same concept. You're still talking about the same study. So it's going to be similar, but it should not be identical. Okay, go ahead and move on. So we talked a lot about summarizing articles. Um, and what I'd like to do now is kind of give you a high-level overview and examples of how to summarize articles. What does this look like? What is a good article summary? Usually the summary, if it is an important article or an important concept that you want to cover, it's usually going to be covered in 4 to 5 sentences. Usually you will not cover like something extremely important in 1 sentence or 2 sentences. Give it a little bit of space. And sometimes it can be more than 5 sentences. Sometimes you do need more than that, but that's just a general rule of thumb. When you're doing these summaries, either if it's for a specific article, I'm going to show you an example in a second of how to do this for a specific article and how to do this for like kind of a group of articles. You want to make sure you answer the following questions, which are, what was the article's research question? So what was its main focus? What was that main focus it was looking at? A little bit about design, especially if you're publishing more like engineering education and Journal of Engineering Education, they're going to want more information on stuff like that. So variables, manipulation, and other types of important specialty information. So like, was it using a specific population or did it have a specific setting? And what I mean by that is maybe that study was only looking at students who had low prior knowledge. So they didn't know anything. They knew little or nothing about the topic area. They were novices, complete novices. Or maybe it was important as in the setting. So maybe they were looking at freshmen versus senior classmen versus graduate students. If they were looking at one of those a different type of population that way, it would be good to state that in your summary of it. Because it could be important for generalizability. Then, what were the results? What were the implications, potential implications for the results? And what are the implications to your research question? Again, remember you're telling this and you're building a logical flow. So you have to be telling and talking about this study or this topic for a reason. You always want to tie it back somehow, and it's usually good to try to make that explicit to your current topic. You don't have to do that all the time, but again, it's good to kind of remind them. Why? Remember earlier when I talked about how people can get confused and they can get off on like a garden path and go on their own way. By bringing the research question back and retying it back into the current topic of research, you help to keep your reader focused on what you're talking about. So I do have 2 examples here. And imagine if we had a research question with something like, how can the classroom interactions be structured to improve engineering education, or education within engineering, or education within an engineering classroom, something like that. I have 2 different examples here. One is an example of one article being summarized, and the other is an example of summarizing kind of a group of research articles. I am not going to go into a lot of detail on this. As far as reading it, you can also read through these on your own time. But one thing to point out, notice it starts out, I say who the author was. This is my own work. I give a citation. Yes, even though I'm writing this, I'm citing this myself. I'm citing to say, yes, I said this, and I said this in 2006. And then I talk a little bit about what I did. Here's the methodological information here in the 2nd line. 3rd line, what is it comparing it to? Then they found, blah, blah, blah. Notice here I actually said they found, blah, blah, blah. Even though I'm talking about my own work, that's usually a good thing to take in. It actually helps you seem more objective as a writer. So even though I'm talking about myself, I could have said that I or we found. So this is an example of writing it when you're trying to make your writing sound a little bit more objective. And again, at the end, so the deep level reasoning questions, which were the main purpose of this, could be useful. Could be a useful dialogue feature to manipulate. Not just to manipulate within engineering classrooms, to make it even more specific. And notice I actually did say that here at the second one. The second example here, I am also talking about some of my research on deep level reasoning questions. I talk about the dialogue features questions. Notice here that I'm talking about what was found in multiple areas of research. I do summarize what it is that I'm looking at, underlying mechanism. They found that presenting these, incorporating these questions, helps to improve quality of the tutor's discussions, improving learning within the domain of computing education, physics, biology, and mathematics. Notice what I did here. I actually pulled in four different papers. And notice how I cited them differently. And I cited them very specifically. So you know that increased quality of tutorial discussions, that was from this paper. Improving learning in the domain of computing education, that's the 2006 paper. Oh, and in physics, that's the 2012 paper. Biology and mathematics, oh, that's the 2013 paper. And it's usually better to cite this way also, because then your reader, if they are only interested in computing education, they know to go find this paper. If they are interested in physics, they know to go find this paper. A lot of people will write this as quality of tutorial discussions and improving blah, blah, blah in the domains of computing education, physics, biology, and mathematics. Then they put all the citations at the end. That is not useful for the reader. It's much more useful if you follow this structure. And then again, I end it by tying it back into our main research question. Now, I also, for when you go back to reread this, I've changed the colors of the text to help you find the similar types of information in the different summaries. Notice here that, like in the blue area, which I'm actually talking about specific things that are manipulated by this work, a lot more detail in the single one than the compilation. The reason why is because this is going over many different studies, you need to be more general about the specifics. But when I'm talking about the findings, obviously if you're talking about findings from multiple studies, that's going to be much longer than if it's just one study. And I kept, in order to be concise, I left the tie-in to the current topic short. Okay, so, and as again, I encourage you to go back, look over this on your own. You might want to come back through here, see if you can pull out the answers to these questions from these summaries, and then you can use this to help cue you in as to where they may be found. So, closing the introduction. The introduction, you really should close with, you want to end it with the rationale of why you're doing the current study. But you might be like, wait, I've already done that. You did that in the opening. Don't assume that by the time you get to the end of your introduction that your reader still has all of that in memory. Human memory does not work that way usually. So it's always good to remind your reader. And also remind them specifically what you're attempting to contribute. Remind them of your larger research question. Explain how the research questions are related to the larger issues, and describe what your specific claim or hypothesis is that you're going to evaluate. So in short, remember, you end with the rationale, specifically what you're attempting to contribute. Remind them of the larger research question, and depending on where you are writing things for, it is usually good to give a grounded hypothesis. So if you're going more towards a journal article, it's good to do this, especially if it's in more like an engineering education research-based journal. So Journal of Engineering Education, you would definitely want to give some form of grounded hypothesis at the end of your introduction section. And all of this grounded hypothesis, all it does is actually, it explains your research questions and how they're related to the larger issues, and it describes them in specific terms that you are going to be testing. So psychology or education, whatever, that you're going to be looking at. So here's an example of this. And one thing I want to point out, not to go into too much detail, is because notice here I put in brackets to indicate variables. When looking over this, you can kind of think about plugging specific things into these specific areas. Now, if you're writing, would you use this exact generic grounded hypothesis? No, you would not. This is just an example for you to think through it. And what I would also like to encourage all of you to do, kind of for homework, is think through a research question and see if you can actually generate some form of grounded hypothesis for it. And if you have trouble and questions in trying to do that, let us know. Where here, for example, X would be a variable, Y would also be the setting for a specific variable, and Z would be a different variable. And that's all these are, just like 3 different types of variables. And you're saying that because of this, it will impact your dependent variable in a specific way. So you can think through this. I'm not going to go into much more detail about it right now. Think through it. If you have questions, if you don't understand it, give us the questions and we'll readdress it next time. So I want to move on to the next section of the paper, which is the method section. Usually
there's a few questions, Scotty, that we should address. One of them is, does the article summary, can it be similar to the abstract sometimes? And I kind of addressed this question earlier, and I'll just, I guess, take another shot at answering it. The abstract that gets written by the authors has its own purpose. They are trying to explain what their paper does to further their research. It's in their context and so on and so forth. When you are doing your work, you tend to cite papers that are relevant, but they're not exactly the same thing that you're trying to do. So the context in which you are trying to do the work is usually slightly different than the context in which they did their work. And so their abstract might focus on a few things that are not your focus, and so that's why you want to write your own version of the abstract for them. So that's one thing. Obviously, you don't want to plagiarize the abstract either, so you don't want to just take their abstract and drop it in.
Yeah, that's true. Copying and pasting an abstract is still plagiarism.
So another question that came up was just related to formatting. Can we use superscript numbering instead of mentioning the names and authors and years in parentheses? So that's just a question of what kind of citation, or what kind of I'm forgetting the word
style that you're using.
Yes.
So for example, the style that I was showing earlier. Oops, let me see if I can go back up to it. So this example that I have here is APA style. So if you are using a different type of style, depending on what your target audience or target outlet is, they will probably have a different citation style.
And it's rarely up to you as the author to choose what style you want to use. Every journal and every conference that I've come across has had a template of some sort or has recommended using a standard format. So for example, ACM has a standard format for its transactions. It has a standard format for its proceedings. IEEE has the same thing. sometimes journals will be nice enough to just say use APA, which in my opinion is the best style. And then some will just have some other recommendations. So the superscript one I've seen for ASCE papers. It's a little annoying in my opinion, but that's just my opinion. One more question that came up. Do you have anything else, Scotty, on that?
I don't.
Okay, so one more question that came up, last one on this topic, is can we have number of hypotheses? So instead of just one hypothesis, we have multiple.
Sometimes you can have multiple hypotheses. It's perfectly okay. If you're going to be looking at enough data to look at and address multiple hypotheses. Larger papers will often have more than one hypothesis, but if you're writing a short paper, especially a conference proceedings, if you're going more than like one or two hypotheses, that's probably going to be very difficult to cover in like a small short paper. Now, one thing to point out, there's a difference between a hypothesis and a prediction. A prediction may be some specific, it is a specific thing that you are going to be testing. So you might say that, so online classes, collaboration within online classes will be worse than collaboration in in-person classes. So that's a specific prediction that can be made. That doesn't have to be, that is not a hypothesis, that is one prediction. And you may have several predictions based off of a hypothesis.
Right, you could have say for example, you could also have a research question with sub-questions in it.
Yes.
And just like that, sub-hypotheses perhaps. So going with the example Scotty said, we predict that the cooperative learning will be worse. So we could also have predictions on why would it be worse. We think it would be worse because the courses are asynchronous, or we think it would be worse because the students don't share the same physical space. So we could say all of these things if you want early on.
Yeah, but the thing is, you have to realize that with both of those, with the data that we have, we'd have to be able to test asynchrony versus synchrony. Mm-hmm. We'd have to be able to test, I forgot the other example that you had.
Whether they're in the same room or not.
Same room or not. So we'd have to actually make sure we had data to adjust that. Right. And you don't want to put in a, you don't want to put in a hypothesis into your paper if you do not have data to address it.
Right. And I think that leads very well into the next topic we want to talk about, which is the method section.
Method section, yes.
So real quick before Scotty gets into some of the details, I want to point out a couple of things. One, especially when it comes to engineering education research, for people who have not done human subjects research before, or have not done education research but are used to doing, say, computer science or mechanical engineering or whatever else that might be our technical area, this is the one section that is very, very different from anything you've previously written. And I'd say I struggled to get this section done well quite a bit. And of course, this is not just, we're not just talking about writing this section, but actually even setting up the study for that matter. When it involves human subjects, it is impossible for someone not exposed to human subjects research to do this setup really well. And I was really fortunate enough to have started doing engineering education research with collaborators who were experts in human subject studies. So I was collaborating with people from the English department, people from educational leadership, education psychology, when I was at Oklahoma State when I started doing this research. So they would ask the right questions. They would have a plan as to, how are we going to test this? And we had to file for what is known as IRB approval. I'm not going to get into details of that, but all of that really helped me personally figure out, okay, what should this look like as far as setting up the experiment is concerned, because that's what the method section really explains. Like, what did the study actually involve? How was the experiment run, or how was it set up? And I'd say, really, if this is not something you're used to, I think you should really try to figure out who you want to collaborate with, who's had some experience with this. And of course, Scotty and I are available to help out and give tips if you want. And if you're especially doing something in computer engineering or something that is a field that I'm interested in, I'd be happy to work with you. But we, as in Krishna, and the whole idea of IUCEE is trying to create a network of people where you can actually seek help from others who have some experience in this. And I cannot stress the importance of that enough. I think it's very hard to write a good method section if you've not done any prior work in human subjects, and if you're not collaborating with someone who has that prior experience. So, Scott, you want to go to the next slide?
Yeah, so I'll go ahead and get started. Before going on to the next slide, though, one thing I'll point out is that we only have 8 minutes left. And yes, I think I can get through this in 8 minutes. We'll see. But one thing to point out to you, in general in the method section, there's one big piece of advice I have to give to you at the beginning before I start going through a lot of this information, and that is details matter. Read your method section when you're writing it, and after you're done, when you're rereading it. You have to think about it. Can somebody who has never seen this before, has no idea what study you did, pick up your method section and recreate your study? Can they replicate it based on what you have written? That's how much level of detail it needs to be in order to be a good method section. Sometimes you have space to give all that information, sometimes you do not. So, method section, what is this? So it can vary greatly depending on your research area. It contains detail on basically how the study was conducted. You always need to have information on 3 specific sections. You can actually think about these as 3 specific subsections. And this would be participants, materials, and procedures. Now, participants, these are the people that were in the study. So you want to make sure you describe your participant sample. How many people did you have? How many people did you recruit? Where did you get them from? Is there anything special about them? So if you recruited all of your participants from one class at one university, you need to make that clear. Was there anything else special about that population? So what do you know about them? Sometimes if you know information as far as like ethnicity breakdown or gender breakdown, or even sometimes socioeconomic status, all that types of information sometimes is actually needed for writing a good participant section, because your participants are who give you your data, which means that any innate biases that they may have is going to be in your data. That's why it's so important to give as much details as you can on your participants. And another important fact, or important thing you need to make sure you include is, did you exclude any participants? And if you did, you need to have reasons why. So examples of that, maybe you only wanted to look at participants with the low knowledge. So you had a variable where you excluded people who had high knowledge, and you need to say what the cutoff was, and why the cutoff was set that way, and how many people were excluded because of that. Sometimes you exclude participants because they did not give you good data. Not mean you didn't like the data, but that they gave you gibberish. They just wrote random things down instead of actually trying to participate. Or we have a term we talk about Christmas treeing multiple choice, where there's like an obvious pattern. They just basically went down and gave the same answer every time. So if you can find ways in which your can give evidence why they were non-compliant and they were removed. That's when you can exclude them from the study, not use their data, and you need to be specific about it. And if you have different conditions, you need to look to see, did that happen more in one condition than the other conditions? And that's the issue of attrition, which we're not getting into here. That's the participant section. So materials section. This is generally the second section of a method section.
Hey, Scotty,
Yes.
your slide still shows the method section.
Thank you.
Slide.
Sorry, everybody, the other one, my version of it was going forward.
Yeah, and unfortunately, I was looking at our slide set as well, and I just pushed the slides forward myself.
Thank you for catching that. So materials. So just so you know, everybody, everything I just told you, here are the three sections I talked about. These are the main questions you're asking during the participant section, which I talked through. Now the material section is where we are now. So you want to describe in detail everything that you used in the study. What tests did you conduct? So if you had a dependent variable that you're collecting, like a learning measure, what was that variable? What did you use to collect that data? What is your test? You need to describe that test in detail. Where did you get it? What were the types of items were on the test? How many were on the test? When I say what type of items, it's more like, were they multiple choice? Were they long answer? So were they writing it out? Were they actually doing some type of problem and doing like problem solving? You need to describe that in your data. You also want to describe any of the materials that you use to implement your manipulation. So if you had multiple sections of a class, for example, and you implemented your participants, your innovation in one class and you didn't in the other, you need to describe specifically what you did to implement that innovation. What was it? Did you give everybody, for example, going back to the questions example, maybe you gave lectures with deep level questions on each slide. In one classroom, and the other one you did not. You need to describe what that manipulation looked like, how many questions were used, what were they. That type of information needs to be described. Now that's highly tied into the next area, which is procedure. The procedure section is the easiest section to write, I think. If you can be thorough, and you can actually just follow like a step-by-step procedure. So, and that's all it is, step-by-step walkthrough of what your participants experienced. You're looking then for sequence, information. What did it look like over time? Did you have timing at important steps? So obviously with this, if you're doing an intervention over multiple days or weeks, you wouldn't want to describe each day, but you would want to describe a typical day. What did it look like? If there were tests that you gave periodically, how many? Where did they fall within the training? How long did students have? Did you let people take makeup tests? Were those included? That level of information. And also timing as far as like if you had an intervention, if you're implementing something within your lectures, how long were those lectures? How long did they typically last? Or how long did the manipulation last that you were implementing in it? So that is the procedure, and it is just step by step by step.
So Scotty, you want to just introduce the activity we want them to do for next time, because we're out of time.
I have to say, and we are out of time, and we are right here at the activity, which we would like you to do for the last time. I was just about to do that, so we want you to look at the two example papers, and kind of look at them for the strengths and weaknesses of them. Look at the method section. Look at the introduction section of the two. Kind of look at them. Which ones actually seem like they're easier for you to follow? Can you pull out this information from them? So, going back to those two research questions, going back to like research questions, can you identify the research questions? Can you identify the hypotheses? Can you identify solid background research? And methods. Can you find the participants? Can you find the materials section and understand what the materials are? And procedure, that step-by-step procedure. See if you can find all that information in those two papers. And see if one is more difficult than the other for you. And we do have an example. One should be a little bit easier to find. It should be better organized than the other, apparently, according to Soham. So thank you, everybody, for joining us for the second time this week. So I believe next week, Soham, do you have the schedule up?
We're not doing anything next week.
Right? Yes. That's what I thought. We are not meeting next Monday, everybody, or technically Tuesday morning, I believe, for you. So we will see you not next week, but the week after that, we will be back, and we hope that you'll be joining us. Thank you again for listening to me for another hour today, everybody. We want to thank you for that. And please send us your questions.
Right, yeah, keep sending us questions. We'll be happy to respond to them. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you.